Based on the famous novel by Victor Hugo, the musical begins in 1815, 26 years after the start of the French Revolution. Once again, a tyrant is occupying the throne of France. In this context, we meet Jean Valjean, a prisoner serving an unjust 19-year sentence for stealing a loaf of bread, plus multiple escape attempts. Together with his fellow inmates, he is forced to pull an enormous ship to bring it into port. That is just one of the many forced labor tasks imposed by the chief guard, Javert, a man with an inflexible sense of justice. When everyone heads back to their cells, Javert assigns one last task to Jean: carry a heavy mast with the French flag. It seems impossible for a man, yet the prisoner lifts it with immense strength, something only Wolverine could do if this were a superhero story. Having done so, Javert grants him parole because his sentence has ended, although Jean doesn't take it with much joy. Deep down, he knows perfectly well that he was the victim of a tyrannical system. In his condition as an ex-convict, everyone refuses to give him work, let alone a roof to sleep under. He is beaten up in the alleys, and even children mock him. One night, Jean collapses at the door of a church, where he is found by the Bishop of Digne, who, contrary to everyone else, realizes that the law has failed him and offers him refuge. Although Jean eats as never before and sleeps in a decent bed, he waits for everyone to fall asleep to steal a set of the bishop's silverware. During his escape, he is captured by local guards and taken before the bishop. Far from punishing him, the bishop explains to the officers that he gave those items to Jean, which he must use wisely to become an honest man. Moved by his host's kindness, Jean decides to tear up his parole sheet and adopt a new identity, bearing forever the man he once was. 8 years later, we see him as the mayor of the French city of Montreuil and the owner of a factory where a conflict has just broken out among the female workers. It turns out that one of them, Fantine, has been hiding the existence of her illegitimate daughter. Now that they have discovered a letter from the child's caretakers, her co-workers believe she is stealing money to send it to her daughter. Jean appears to calm the situation, but he notices that someone from his past has returned, none other than Javert, now promoted to police inspector. Shocked, Jean orders his foreman to deal with the matter, and Fantine is immediately fired. Meanwhile, Jean meets with Javert, who does not seem to recognize him because of his new appearance, and offers his police services. Their conversation is interrupted by a citizen whose cart has fallen on top of him. Immediately, the mayor lifts the cart with overwhelming strength to help him. However, this exposes him before the inspector, who has seen only one man with that kind of strength, a convict who broke his parole and disappeared years ago. Still, Javert isn't entirely sure they are the same man. That night, Fantine is forced to visit the slums to sell her hair and even some of her teeth in exchange for money for her daughter. Then the local prostitutes convince her to join them so that she will no longer lack money. After selling her dignity to a man, Fantine remembers with nostalgia the dreams she had when she was young, dreams crushed by real life. When her next client appears, she refuses to satisfy him and even scratches his face, so he immediately reports her to Javert, who doesn't care in the least that she has a daughter to support. Luckily, Jean was nearby and intervenes on her behalf. She recognizes him as the man who allowed her to be fired. Apologizing, the mayor carries her in his arms to the hospital. The next day, Javert apologizes to the mayor for having mistaken him for Jean Valjean, since it so happens that a man with that name has been arrested and will be punished for breaking his parole. This presents a true dilemma for the real Jean, who remembers that many people depend on him. Nevertheless, he cannot stand by while an innocent man pays for his crimes. He bursts into the trial of the accused to reveal his true identity. Before surrendering, Jean stops by the hospital to see Fantine. In her feverish state, she sees a vision of her daughter Cosette, and Jean recognizes these signs as those of someone close to death. He promises to look after her daughter as if she were his own, and thanks to that, Fantine is able to die in peace. Just then, Javert arrives to arrest him. Jean asks for 3 days to place Cosette in a safe place and then turn himself in. However, the inspector insists that men like him never change and attacks him. After an intense struggle, Jean jumps out the window into the river, disappearing into the water. Meanwhile, little Cosette is mistreated at the inn of Monsieur and Madame Thénardier, an unscrupulous couple who turned her into their servant because her mother sent them very little money. However, with their own daughter, Éponine, they are loving and kind. Monsieur Thénardier lures customers to his inn, steals their belongings in clever ways, and scams them in countless ways. Meanwhile, Madame Thénardier showers praise on an official who is staying there, someone she would have liked to marry. Of course, it's all just an act to take advantage of him and steal his money. Not far away, little Cosette goes into the woods to fetch water, where she is found by Jean, who tells her that her mother is in heaven and that he promised to become her father. To do so, he must deal with her caretakers, who pretend to love the girl only to squeeze every last cent out of Jean. Beyond these undesirable people, he secures Cosette's freedom and gives her a beautiful doll. Thanks to that, he gains the girl's trust, and they set off together toward a new life. Along the way, Jean is overjoyed at how suddenly his life has changed. A few hours ago, he was a condemned man, and now he is a new father. However, his ghost from the past will not let him go so easily. As soon as he reaches the north gate of Paris, Javert and his police intercept him. At once, Jean and Cosette flee through a courtyard, becoming easy prey for the inspector, or so he thinks. Jean climbs to the top of the wall and hoists the girl up with a rope. They arrive at a gravedigger's yard, who happens to be the same citizen that Jean saved from the cart. Because of that, he leads them to a sanctuary where they can hide from Javert, who swears under the stars that he will not rest until Jean is behind bars. We jump ahead 9 years to a Paris in turmoil due to hunger affecting most of the citizens, while the bourgeoisie ignores their pleas. Because of this, a large group of revolutionary students plans a rebellion against the French monarchy. It sounds radical, but their only supporter within the government, Lamarck, is near death, so they feel they have no other option. Amid the protest, Marius, one of the movement's leaders, is confronted by his grandfather, who informs him that his family is very disappointed with his actions. Marius was born into a wealthy family, yet he prefers to live like one of the people to show his commitment to the rebellion. Though he is very determined, he can fall in love like anyone else. One day on the streets of Paris, he falls in love at first sight with a charming young girl walking with her father, Jean. Indeed, that young lady is Cosette. Soon, some vagabonds lure Jean over to help them, but he quickly discovers it is the Thénardier, who threaten him with their thugs to demand more money for Cosette. Their daughter Éponine, who has been forced to join their misdeeds, warns them that the police are coming. Jean is relieved until he realizes that the officers are led by Javert, and so he flees quickly with his daughter. The inspector asks the Thénardier about the man who just fled, and they claim he kidnapped their dear Cosette years ago. Hearing this, Javert recognizes that man as Jean Valjean. Meanwhile, Marius, enchanted by Cosette, asks his friend Éponine to find out where the girl lives. She agrees easily, though deep down it hurts that Marius doesn't notice her feelings. Later, Marius tells his fellow rebels about the girl who captured his heart at first glance, which seems inappropriate to Enjolras, who reminds him they can't be distracted by such trifles. There is something far more important to fight for. At that moment, they receive news that the official Lamarck, their only ally in government, has died from his illness. As they anticipated, this is the moment to spark a revolution. For her part, Cosette also dreams of the young man she saw earlier and hopes that he will find her. However, her lifestyle has little room for love, since her father usually keeps her isolated from society and tells her nothing about his past. Just then, Marius appears in front of her home, thanks to Éponine's help. While the young couple declares their love through the gate, Éponine realizes she will never occupy a place in Marius's heart. Their romantic moment is interrupted by Jean, who orders his daughter back inside. She leaves a handkerchief with her suitor, who walks away full of hope. Seconds later, Monsieur Thénardier arrives with his thugs to break into Jean's house, so Éponine screams to warn them, thinking it's Javert. Jean begins to pack to flee with Cosette again, who doesn't understand why they must leave amid the chaos. She leaves a letter with her new address for Marius, though Éponine secretly takes it. She is tempted to give it to him, but since he has never loved her in return, she chooses to hide it and join the rebellion instead, looking for a new purpose. While Jean and Cosette head to another refuge, Marius despairs over her unexplained departure and returns to his fellow rebels to fight by their side. The next day, during Lamarck's funeral procession, Javert disguises himself as a civilian to infiltrate the rebels. Marius and Enjolras climb onto Lamarck's carriage to take control of the march, while citizens gather in the streets. It's an inspiring scene until soldiers pull out their weapons and shoot an innocent elderly woman, sparking an armed confrontation. In search of protection, the rebels build a barricade around a friendly tavern. Then Enjolras asks for a volunteer to report on the enemy's movements. Surprisingly, Javert reveals himself as a former officer who could help. Later, Javert returns with information that the soldiers will not attack immediately because they would rather let hunger weaken the rebels. However, Gavroche, a rebel child, recognizes him as the police inspector, so the rebels imprison Javert in the tavern. Seconds later, a bunch of soldiers arrive to resume the fight. Amid the chaos, Marius tries to climb the barricade with a barrel of gunpowder to reach the enemy's side, but one of them has him in his sights. As soon as the soldier fires, Eponine jumps in the way to protect the young man, who doesn't notice what happened through the roar of battle. Threatening to blow up the barricade, the rebels force the soldiers to retreat, and Marius realizes Eponine is injured. Far from showing her pain, she finds comfort in her beloved's arms until she hands him the letter and her eyes close forever. Afterwards, Marius sends Gavroche to Cosette's apartment to deliver the letter. However, it's Jean who receives it, and upon learning that his daughter's suitor is a rebel, he decides to protect him. Disguised as a soldier, he makes his way to the barricade. At first, the rebels think he is a spy, until he warns them about a hidden enemy sniper. Seeing Javert imprisoned, Jean demands to be his executioner in private. He finally has a chance to take revenge on his archenemy, yet unexpectedly decides to set him free. Dumbfounded, Javert thinks Jean wants to make a deal, but Jean replies that he holds no grudge. Javert was only doing his duty. With that, Jean fires a shot at the wall so the rebels will believe he really killed him. At dawn, the rebels realize they are the last ones left and have very little ammunition. Far from surrendering, Gavroche crosses to the other side to gather bullets from the dead. He is at the mercy of the soldiers, who shoot him mercilessly. In honor of his memory, his companions decide to keep fighting, even though the enemy is far more powerful. In the battle, Marius is injured, so Jean drags him into a sewer. Meanwhile, Enjolras dies proudly at the soldiers' hands. After the massacre, Javert places his police medal on Gavroche's body in respect, then searches for possible survivors and notices the sewer cover has been left open. As he goes down, Jean falls and is knocked unconscious, along with Marius. Right there, Monsieur Thénardier is busy robbing belongings off the corpses, including Marius's ring. Suddenly, Jean regains consciousness and keeps carrying the young man toward the exit, where Javert catches them by surprise. Even so, Jean ignores the inspector's threats and keeps going, because Marius needs a hospital. The inspector is forced to let him go, and soon feels great despair. Never before had he shown mercy to a criminal, and worse, that alleged criminal had spared his own life earlier. With the stars as witness, Javert throws himself into the river Seine. The next day, after awakening in the hospital, Marius returns to the tavern, where he now sees the ghosts of his fallen friends. They all fought for a tomorrow that never arrived. Then Cosette appears to give him comfort and convinces him to return to his family so they can live together. Marius also invites his father-in-law to come live with them, but Jean refuses outright and reveals his criminal past, something that always endangers Cosette. Having said that, he leaves without saying goodbye to his daughter. Despite his pain, Marius promises not to tell Cosette anything about her father's past. Later, the young couple marries in a grand wedding, attended in secret by the Thénardier. As soon as Marius recognizes them, he tries to kick them out, but Monsieur Thénardier has gossip about Jean. He claims he saw him in the sewers dragging the body of a young man he had killed, and he has a ring as proof. Marius recognizes his own ring and realizes Jean saved his life that day. Monsieur Thénardier demands money to tell him where Jean is hiding, but a punch makes him talk faster. Meanwhile, at the convent, Jean waits for his final moments, seeing the spirit of Fantine calling him. Just then, his daughter and her husband arrive to help him, though he has already made peace with his fate. After giving them his blessing, Jean gives Cosette a letter explaining the truth of his past, the story of a man who stopped hating and learned to love. Finally, Jean lets Fantine take him to the heavenly realm, where he is reunited with the bishop and all the fallen rebels, who are still singing for their cause.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.